Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today, I guess tonight. I am really excited to hear from you tonight, to hear what's on your mind while we've been over here in Olympia working really hard to ensure that we continue moving through all of the many changes we are all experiencing. And as promised, leaving nobody behind. We have been through a lot together. We've been through a pandemic that seemingly never ends. We have been through severe flooding. We've seen some pretty incredibly severe weather patterns. And really at the same time, we've experienced a mental health crisis for our kids. And we've gone through all of that together. And I recognize that our community is really hurting. And my focus is to lead us through all of that to healing and also to recovery, both economically and in community together. We've experienced so much loss and really just with every bit of this crisis that we've been enduring, I think that we also have opportunity. And so my real goal is to ensure that with that crisis, we're capitalizing on that opportunity together. So I have enjoyed through this process working with you and partnering with so many of you in our community on this recovery. I look forward to all that we're going to do together. And tonight, I'm just really excited to hear from you. So I will pass it to my seatmate Representative Sharon Shewmake.
Thank you so much. So we're halfway through session, actually a little bit more. We're both still working on bills, but we're also getting into the part of session where we're really focused on the budget. It's about budget time. I still have 5 bills alive. 2 are on green energy. One is making sure that low-income folks are part of that green energy transition. The other one is making sure that those green jobs are built here in Washington and that they're good family wage jobs. And so we have a series of tax incentives for those jobs. The other 2 are on housing, making sure that we're addressing the housing supply. One is a low interest loan program. The other one is a looking at the supply side. And so we're encouraging cities to build ADUs, or at least allow for ADUs. We also have, and then I have the fifth bill that's a little good government bill, and that's looking at hunters and fishers with disabilities and making some changes to the advisory council on that. So Alicia and I both have a number of budget requests. So on affordable housing, mental health care, community projects, broadband, the Lummi Island Ferry, $4 million for the Kendall Trail, and of course, a lot of money to address flooding. There's also been a theme of resiliency that I've been thinking about when we look at the pieces of legislation that we've seen here. So the pandemic and the floods just really shows us what happens when people don't have options. When they're so close to the edge, then something bad happens. It's so much harder to recover from that. And so we need to make sure that there's options in a local food system that's not dominated by big boys. It's also make sure that schools and healthcare facilities that aren't run so bare that they can't withstand stress. And as we know, our nurses, teachers, first responders, mental health care, grocery, and other frontline workers, they have really shown their heroism. And so every day of virtual or actually being in Olympia, I know Alicia and I think a lot about how does this piece of legislation influence people at home? What are people at home going to be thinking about it? And I'm so glad to be here because now is your time to ask us these questions.
All right, thank you. And let's stay on the topic of flooding for our first question. Well, first couple questions actually, because we got a couple of them in the survey. And let's start with Jeannie. Her question is, have people forgotten about the big flood? What are you doing to help families, businesses, and farms that suffered from the flooding?
Thank you. I'm happy to jump in and take this one. Far from forgotten, flooding is actually right at the top of my priority list day to day. There isn't a day that goes by that we are not somehow working on some portion of not only this flood, which was so significant and so damaging, but also thinking about how we can prepare in the future so that we can be prepared at a state level to respond to some of these disasters. I have 2 bills right now that are still alive that have passed out of the House and onto the Senate. Both actually, I have to catch up. I think we might actually have them through the Senate as well, but soon to be coming back over to the House. One of them is specifically for small businesses. And this is so important because we had a lot of businesses that were impacted in this latest natural disaster. The flood will not be the only natural disaster, but it certainly is the one that we're working with. And I learned a lot during this experience. And one of the things that I realized is that there's some gaps in our relief system. And that's one of the places that certainly leaves a bit of a gap. What I heard is that the go-to is loans. And many of our business owners said, we have just lost everything. And the expense to come and repair and to get some sort of relief to get on the road to recovery and open back up is just too much to take in loans. And we really need something that's both fast and a grant program. So this bill puts that in place so that we can have relief for those businesses like the coffee shop in Sumas that lost so much product, as well as all the damage to their shop, or some of the restaurants. I mean, there was a restaurant in Sumas that had a railroad tie in the middle of their dining room. No business owner could prepare for that. It's just impossible to know that that was a possibility. So this bill will then put some relief in for those business owners that are really critical parts of the community. They have jobs available for the folks in the community. And so if they can get up and running, people will be back to work. But also in a lot of these cases, in some of the rural areas, this is where people get food. They need to be able to access that, particularly while they are rebuilding their kitchens. And then the other bill that I have is a farmer bill, and it's to give relief to farmers in this other gap area where, as you remember, this flood was so significant that it just violently and swiftly came through, moving objects like cars and dumpsters and a whole bunch of junk, but also manure. And so this bill will set up a program so that those farmers can get some relief for some of that cleanup that just doesn't really fit in any other boxes. But I'll pass it to Representative Shewmake to talk about this from her perspective as well.
Yeah, so there's a part of that question where it was talking about what are we going to do to mitigate the risk of future floods. And I've been working with members of the county, with Rep Rule, with the senator as well, to protect against. You can't prevent a flood from occurring, but you can build in a way and create spaces for the water to go so that it doesn't kill people, it doesn't hurt people, it doesn't harm properties, and you can keep it away from home, right? And so one of the ideas that's been floated is been pulling back the levees a little bit. So at Everson, the water, the Nooksack kind of goes up and then it turns towards the west. It used to actually go up towards and join the Fraser River. And so the river still kind of feels that. And that's what happens when we see the flooding in Everson, Nooksack, and Sumas, is the Nooksack River is overjumping its banks at Everson and flooding Nooksack, Sumas, and then going on to Canada, back up to the Fraser, basically. And so if we can create a little bit more space for that river to slow down around the Everson area, we can make it so it's less likely to jump the banks, but also we can do that without necessarily harming the downstream communities, because some people have talked about, well, how do we just make sure it doesn't float at Everson? You have to think about the downstream communities as well, because that's how water flows. But also we think about how we used to manage the river differently in the past. Well, there's a lot more concrete in in Ferndale than there used to be in the 1990s, right? So we need to think about that. We need to think about these communities. And so we've been doing a lot of planning efforts. And I've been trying to make sure that everyone knows what's going on in the planning efforts, that the downstream communities and the upstream communities are talking to each other and talking about how do we share this risk and what are things that we can do that is based in science, that's based in engineering, but that also reflects our values of keeping people, property safe. Because it's a complicated river system. So we had a meeting a few weeks ago where I brought most of the elected officials, and we're putting together a second meeting to talk about making sure that we all understand the parts that people's working on. I feel like one of the pieces that happened is there was great work going on in flooding. It hadn't gotten to the Everson piece yet. That hadn't really been reached up, but some of the flooding on the South Fork wasn't quite as bad as it used to be. Some of the flooding in other areas, it could have been a lot worse if we hadn't done that work. So let's continue to do that work, and let's focus on this Everson piece so we don't see the Nooksack overjump its banks and flood those communities, or at least we can mitigate that risk.
All right, thank you. And let's do one more question on the flood since we have some more. This one comes from Arnold, and he's asking kind of about a specific issue in the planning. He's asking, are you incorporating tribal voices in flood planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the processes that they've been working through is called the FLIP process. And that was a Floodplains by Design grant. And so in Floodplains by Design, you get farmers, you get local folks, you get tribes, and you do flood projects that also have benefits to agriculture and to fish populations. That's one of the requirements of that program. So this work has been going on for a few years. The county's really been leading that with support from the legislature and funding. If it's okay, I can also answer this question by Casey Atwater in the chat. It's also on flooding. There are hydrogeomorphologists that are doing some really cool work on better understanding the Nooksack. We actually have a pretty extraordinary river system. It's coming down from a volcano, so there's more sediment than almost any other river system, at least in Washington State, but I think it's a wider statement there too. But also because it used to go up north, it's still kind of, it thinks it's doing that, right? And so the river just kind of changes at Everson. So there's an engineering plan. So just like when you build a house, you need a blueprint for that house. We're working on what the blueprint for the Nooksack system would look like. And some of that is also making sure that we understand portions of this river, because we can't necessarily predict everything that's going to happen. And part of this balance is making sure that we don't just study forever and not take any action. But I do think that we need to make sure that the actions we take are prudent, a good use of public funds. This is going to be a really expensive project, but they also keep people safe. They keep communities safe. They keep our environment safe. They keep agriculture safe. And I do think that these things are compatible with one another. They just take smart planning.
And I just love to jump in and tell you a little bit about my thoughts on that. I guess the answer is, of course we are. And we have needed for a long time. It is much overdue that we come together and really start working together. But there is no project like this that makes it crystal clear that we are not moving forward without including each other. And so that means all the players. That means the tribes, but it also means Canada. It means the farmers. It means the residents who are living there. It means those who are houseless, that were houseless before, that are houseless now, those who are left standing. Everybody needs to be at that table for a solution, because this river does not care who you are, what your political borders are, what your political beliefs are. There's just no other option. We've got to start working together in a way that's really different than what we've seen historically.
All right, thank you. Let's turn now to emergency powers. We have a viewer who's joining us on YouTube who asks, do you think Governor Inslee is abusing his emergency powers? And Hannah sent us a question in the survey along the same lines. She's asking about Senate Bill 5909 related to emergency powers. Do you think it does enough or not enough?
Well, thank you for asking this question. I think it's timely. This is such a unique time for all of us. Never in my whole life did I imagine that I would be living through a pandemic. And I try to describe this to my children who say, what was it like when you were a kid and you had a pandemic? It's like, I didn't even think about what a pandemic was. I might have read about it in a textbook, but never did I think that we would be living through it the way that we are today. With that said, I am very grateful that we've done a lot of great measures to keep safe. And also, I think it's incredibly important that we get balance to our democratic process. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to think ahead about how we can be protective of that process. I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to vote on a bill, and I'm looking forward to having it come across over to the House side.
Yeah, and I would agree with a lot of the things that Rep. Rule said. You design emergency powers not necessarily knowing what the emergency is. And I will say that for all the good parts of the legislative process, it is not a fast process. We are not a body. It's not easy to get 147 people to agree with you on something very quickly or really at all. And so making sure that there's some emergency powers reserved for in case, who knows what the next emergency is. Maybe it's like in World War II where we have to turn all our lights off so we don't get bombed. I don't know. Maybe it's Sasquatch, right? And so we want to make sure that there's some flexibility to respond to those pieces. But I also just think that 2 years is a long time, and there should be some additional checks and balances within those 2 years. And I'm looking forward to having a discussion where we think about it, no matter who the governor is, let's make sure that it's someone that they have to come back and get those checks and balances from the legislature.
All right, thank you. Let's turn to another local issue that's going on in our area. We've got a couple of questions about the Alcoa and Talco plant. First, Peter asks, can you tell us more about investments in the smelter? And we also have another question from Dave about noise impacts on the community. Is there any funding for noise abatement?
Peter, I'd love to talk to you about the smelter. This is a really important project. And the reason I know it's important is because these are good living wage jobs, and we need them now as much or more than ever. The cost of goods is high. Families are stressed. And I know in my own community, in the Blaine community, these are the kind of jobs that allow people to have a quality balance of life where they can make enough money to be able to put food on the table, which is no small thing these days, enough money to pay for housing. And also, because these are these good union jobs, you get time off and you get to have weekends and you get to have holidays off sometimes and you get to bank vacation and all of those kinds of things that come with having a balance. And I know that we've all been feeling a lot of stress lately with all that's been coming our way. And these good, solid jobs, many of my family members have been in them for generations. They're hard work, but they bring back good reward. And I think that's really what people need right now. And I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to look for opportunities that can bring back green jobs that fit the bill like that. And this is going to be the greenest aluminum smelter in the world, right here in our backyard. This is the kind of job that allows in my community folks to go work in volunteer in the school. They might be on the PTA. They're our neighbors and our friends. They can volunteer to do Little League coaching sometimes. These are our neighbors and our friends in our community. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to ensure that those jobs do make it here. I think it's important. I think people really need it. So I'm really excited about the project.
Yeah, and I would jump on to talk about that greenness. It's really exciting. A few years ago, we did a clean energy grant to do some energy efficiency. It made it a better place to work. I heard from the workers that it wasn't as hot because there wasn't as much waste heat coming off. But you also look at the cost per ton of CO2 reduced, and it was like 50 cents per ton. I mean, that's an amazing deal. And so the investments that we're making are similar to that. These are things on energy efficiency. And things that are, part of the package of restarting the aluminum smelter, but they're really doing a public service too and making it green. And you think about, when they were talking about the curtailment back in 2020, I mean, it was heartbreaking to hear from the workers. And one of the things that I always found so frustrating is you talk to the workers, and sometimes I just thought that, they really have the big dreams. Like, they were talking about making green aluminum. And one of the reasons that it's relatively green is they're able to use the hydropower from BPA. And so that green aluminum and an energy intensive thing, that's replacing much dirtier aluminum. So in a way that we're also, through trade, we're also greening up some of the global supply chain, which I just think is really exciting. And it's a really exciting opportunity for families here and for community here in Washington State and Whatcom.
All right, thank you. And let's talk about long-term care. We got a question from Charles in the survey. He asks, what are you doing to modify Washington State's long-term care law to be more friendly? He says one of the reasons it's such a bad deal for Washingtonians is because of things like not being able to use it in another state. He says some of us don't intend to retire in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I would just agree. That's one of the problems with this is we want to make sure that if we do this, we're going to do it well and right and make it work for people. One of the things I'm also concerned about is this last time. I'm really grateful that we were able to delay it so that we can work out some of the details. But if somebody wants to retire in another state and they've invested in this, it's a problem for me that they're not able to take it with them. And I also worry about folks that are very close to the end and won't be able, they'll be putting money in and they will not be able to pull out that benefit. But I'll let Representative Shewmake jump in as well if she has other thoughts.
Oh, I agree that I don't think it's fair if you leave out of the state. When they made some changes to the Long-Term Care Act last year, Alicia and I voted no. And that was one of the reasons for my no vote, is that I thought that it was unfair when we live in a border community where so many people are leaving the state to retire, et cetera, that they wouldn't be able to take this benefit with them.
Thank you. All right. We got a question in the survey and from Seth, who's watching on Facebook, about the Ejido project in the capital budget. They say the request was for $1.2 million, and were you able to secure that full amount? Points out that farm workers face many barriers to land ownership in Whatcom County.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Seth, for asking this question. It gives me an opportunity to talk about this incredible program. It did not get fully funded, but it got partially funded. And that's really common for legislative funding, pretty typical that we do things in pieces. So I expect that you'll come back to us, or whoever will come back to us again the next year so we can keep going on this. And we also really like to look for partnered funding. So it's always fun if we can, and cost efficient, to put together layered funding if we can find funding from multiple places. But this is an incredible project because and I had the chance to visit and I really enjoyed my time there. But understanding that first of all, farm worker housing is a huge part of this, which made really excited. We know that has been a long-term issue in Whatcom County, and to be able to make any sort of progress on that, to me, is beyond a step in the right direction. We really need to continue to have a dedication to making that happen. But also what I really love about this is that it comes with opportunity. And there's something different about farming your own land in a cooperative way than farming someone else's land. And I'm really excited about being able to support that we did get some of the funding this year, and look forward to the opportunity to continue working toward toward full success of that program.
Thank you. All right. Remember, folks, this is a live virtual town hall with your state lawmakers. So ask us your questions in the comments, please. And speaking of those questions, let's go to one from YouTube where Charles is watching. He asks, how will you ensure the $5.3 million currently projected for the Lummi Island Ferry survives intact and reaches the governor for his signature?
We're going to fight for it, Charles. We know that how important that ferry is for economic development, for our community, for Lummi Island. Also, I'm really excited to see this new ferry come in and be greener than the old one. So I think you guys have done good work. Part of that is funded in the transportation package. And part of that will be, my understanding is that it'll be funded with a CRAB grant. Although if I'm wrong, tell me, Charles, and you know how to email me.
I mean, we're in here fighting like a boxer for all these projects. It is no small thing that this amount of funding is coming back to Whatcom County, and we're going to make sure it gets through the finish line by not letting up. We're relentless. That's what I'm here to do. I enjoy it, and I am not backing off of anybody until we get what we need in Whatcom County. That's what you elected me to do, so I'm here to do it. I love the Lummi Island Ferry. I have some beautiful childhood memories on Lummi Island, so it's always near and dear to my heart. And my grandpa, who's 91, worked for Whatcom County Public Works for a lot of years and worked on the Whatcom Chief. And even he at 91 was pretty excited to hear about this project. So we'll go in fighting, and we won't quit until it gets through the finish line.
Let's stick with transportation for another question. This one comes from John, who sent us his question in the survey. He says, local roads throughout Bellingham, that's where he travels the most, are in need of repair and replacement. Potholes are rapidly failing on asphalt, and many major and secondary roads are becoming increasingly unsafe. What are you doing to repair these roads?
I can speak a little bit to that. One of the pieces of that is you should email your city council. We don't maintain the city and local roads, but we do have a bill on allowing cities to continue to extend a transportation benefits district. So we have one in Bellingham. We just renewed it, I want to say like 2 years ago. And so they have a 10-year they run out eventually. You can't renew it anymore. And so cities have become to rely on these for things like maintenance. And so I think we should continue to allow voters to decide whether or not they want to renew those.
Thank you. All right, Jason sent us a question also on transportation. He asks, could we invest in a large traffic circle or roundabout at the double light intersection of Meridian, Squalicum, and Birchwood to alleviate the major bottleneck there?
Yes, let's do that. I think that's a great idea.
It's on the COG list of projects. It's just the list has been long and we haven't had a large enough transportation package to get all those pieces out. But that has been something that the local governments, the city, and also the port is really passionate about that, because it's making it more difficult for them to get goods in and out of the port and onto I-5. The proposal also has some exciting bike ped infrastructure there as well, which I love.
Thank you. All right, we got kind of a general question on transportation in the survey as well. This one came from Kevin. He's curious just what's in the transportation package that has been in the news lately.
Do you want me to talk about that, or So there's some, there's a lot of pieces. So there's one piece that I'm not a particular fan of, and that's the export fuel tax. I feel like as a district with 2 refineries that produce a lot of jobs, it doesn't feel like a fair tax for this community. Some of the spending is really wonderful though, so it's a difficult piece to feel. There's money for maintenance and roads. We heard over and over again that people wanted to make sure that we were maintaining the roads and bridges that we have around the state and that we all rely on. And so we weren't seeing that there was enough spending being spent on roads, for state roads. There's another piece of that, which is 18 and under, they get free transit packages, passes. I think that's really exciting for kids who want to go out and explore it. I was that kid that was always trying to ride her bike as far as I possibly could, and really excited when my mom would let me ride the bus. And I think that's great for kids to be able to have that sense of adventure. There's some more specific projects for Whatcom County. One is $4 million for the Kendall Trail. If you've ever driven on 547, will notice that there's not really shoulders there. And we're talking about a community that is often moderate to low income. And so sometimes a $400 car repair bill means that they don't have a car. And so you're talking about folks that really don't have a way to walk to the mini mart, to the school even. And there was a kid that was killed on that trail a few years ago. So the community has said very loud and clear that they want a safe alternative to get back and forth on that for their kids and their community members. There's funding in the transportation package, not the full amount, but we'll cobble that together for the Lummi Island Ferry. There's some work to be done on increasing the capacity of the bus stop in downtown Bellingham. And there's also some money for safe routes to school in Linden to do some bike ped connections. Anything you want to add, Alicia?
No, I don't think so. In my mind, I'm like, and then there's also Bradley Road and Slater Road. And I don't remember if that's on transportation or capital, but in any case, both are also really important.
All right, thanks. Let's switch gears here a bit and go to Rodney's question about broadband. Rodney asks, why are we contributing $100 million to broadband? Isn't this a private for-profit enterprise? Wouldn't that be like using our taxes to build cell phone towers?
I can jump on that. So we see that broadband is something that's called a natural monopoly in economics, right? So it makes sense it's really hard to compete if you have to build a really big capital piece out to a remote area. And that's one of the reasons that we haven't seen broadband necessarily go to all the remote areas, right? There's that big capital outlay. And if you have a private company that does that capital outlay out to a remote area, then that private company can charge you, they have a little monopoly there, right? And so they can charge you high prices and they can give you crappy service because you don't have another option. And so instead, what the approach that we've been taking here in Whatcom is we publicly fund some of the big pieces that go out to a rural community, right? Or that go out to a place that's underserved. And then we do partnerships with local companies that allow them to connect to that. So they sometimes do that last mile. And that allows for competition at the end of these trunks, right? So if Comcast builds it, then you only get Comcast service. If the Port of Bellingham builds it, then you might have Ziply and Comcast and a few other companies. And so you have those choices. So I think a lot like you. I think about like what's an appropriate private investment versus a public investment, but you need broadband to get a job. You need broadband to go to school. You need broadband to come to a town hall with your lovely state representatives. It's just essential to our functioning now, and we need to start treating it the way we did electricity back in the day. We need to recognize that this is essential to modern functions and that we need to treat it as a utility. And so just like we did that where we went out and we made it a big project to electrify the rural areas, we need to do that and connect the rural areas.
Thank you. All right, we got a question from Nathan about crime. He says, neighborhood crime and theft is an epidemic. Can we get more police out to strengthen our laws against theft in the neighborhoods?
I'll grab this one. Nathan, I agree. We need our police officers. We need to support our police officers. We have wonderful police officers in our community. But I also want to add that there's some other things I'm excited about as well. We have been isolated and we have not been in community for a long time. And that is not good for anybody. So in addition to that, which is really important, I think we also need to start getting back downtown. We need to start getting together in person. We need to start moving back into our community spaces and connecting with each other again. So I'm excited about both of those things happening at the same time. I'm always interested in our downtowns. I know that there has been a lot of really concerning things happening in our downtown Bellingham in particular. And some of the investments that we're making will really be pro-social and helpful toward getting a lot more activity down there, which I think is going to be helpful. I'm a downtown business owner. I have staff that is spending their days there. It is concerning to me that we have unsafe behaviors happening and crime. And so I'm looking very much forward to some of the work that we can do both proactively. And also, I was really excited to get some really significant funding for Whatcom County to lead the way in crisis response team. That is our GRACE and our LEAD program. We have been leaders in Washington State for a long time in this area, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done here. So statewide, I was able to secure over $3 million in this area, but right here in Whatcom County, we have almost that much right in our community to work on building out a program that where we can show the rest of the state what we can do here, so that we can have better response to crime. But we need to do both. We need to prevent crime, and we also need to make sure that we have response as well. Our community deserves to be safe, and I am committed to ensuring that we have that in place.
Thank you. All right, keep sending us your questions in the comments, everyone, so we can cover as many topics as possible tonight. And before we move on, let's do one more question on the topic of crime. This one comes from Brianna. She asks, what is being done to address illegal drug sales and drug use? She points out that this is an issue that they're seeing a lot more in Linden.
Yeah, well, so that's a complex question. One of the things that we know for sure is that we're funding some treatment, and our community has been really clear that treatment is an important thing that they want to be able to offer to folks. And right now we don't have those options available. So if and when somebody is ready to get that treatment, we need to make sure that doors are open and ready to go. So we have secured funding for a couple of things, a 32-bed inpatient behavioral health facility in Bellingham. But in addition, a crisis stabilization center in Bellingham, which was last year, we were able to get funding for the operating expenses there that has a piece. And we're just continuing to build out this system that has really treatment options for people when they're ready for it and when they need it. In addition to that, which is pretty incredible for Whatcom County to lead in this way, we have some funding for a Lummi detox center, a wellness center that will be specifically used for opioid detox. And so that's another piece of building this out. We, in the middle of last legislative session, we had a surprise issue dropped out from the courts that said when folks are in possession, it is no longer a crime, and it changed everything. I'm very concerned about it. I'm concerned enough that I introduced a bill to outlaw fentanyl, to make that a felony. It didn't go anywhere in the legislature, but I did that because I'm really concerned about lost lives. At the same time, we need to ensure that we have treatment and programs and capital facilities available when people are able to get there. We're looking at changing and shifting some laws so that the Involuntary Commitment Act can be a little bit more user friendly, and also that we got a transportation to the Crisis Stabilization Center funded so that we can make sure that people can actually get that transport there when they need it as well.
Thank you. All right, let's go to a question from Ryan. Ryan sent us his question in the survey, and he asks, what does Washington State expect, or how does Washington State expect COVID-19 to play out in 2022? Are there estimates for Whatcom County that detail or model how businesses, families, and community health have been affected during the pandemic? And is also curious if there's any similar modeling or projections for this year.
Ryan, I would say that the pandemic has made fools out of anyone who seeks to make a prediction. I don't think anyone can predict what this is going to look like in a year, but I will foolishly make a prediction, which is I think we're coming to a point where we need to learn to live with the virus, and that means something different for different people, right? It's not saying just go crazy and let everyone get it, but it's recognizing that we have different tools than we had in 2020. We have access to vaccines for those who want to take them to better protect themselves and their family. We have better mask availability. So at first we just had those little cloth masks and it was, I protect you, but I don't really filter it things. Now the cloth masks, the N95 and the KN95 are available, affordable, and they actually do a pretty decent job of impacting you too, of protecting you. We have better access to testing. So the schools have been doing test to stay programs. We also have better therapeutics now. So when you do get sick, and I hope you don't get sick, you have a better shot of having a shorter stay, not necessarily having long COVID and surviving this virus. So it's this remember in the beginning of the pandemic, we thought it was going to be 3 weeks and then it was just going to be gone. I mean, clearly that wasn't the case. So I think as we go forward, it's going to continue to be a difficult to predict economy. We're starting to see some movement on the supply chain issues, but in some ways it also is more difficult than what we expected. And we're here to continue to respond and do the policy pieces to that. One of the things that's really important to me is that kids continue to stay in school, that we're able to keep our schools open. And so we're going to need flexible policy that allows people to live their lives, but also stay safe. And the biggest piece of this I can say is that, you know, as much as we see people yelling on the two sides, like masks for everyone, no masks, etc., we need to remember to be kind to each other. As many people are as excited about the order being lifted, there are also people that are really, really nervous about it. And don't necessarily judge that you know everything about someone, whether or not they're wearing a mask. Remember that we're all people. We were somebody's little baby once, and we all deserve kindness.
And in addition to that, I would just add, when I think about the pandemic, one of the things I think a lot about is the economics. We don't know what to predict next. That's true, but we cannot just refuse to act. We have to act proactively, both with the economics and with the community building. Community doesn't get rebuilt by itself. So when we look at investments in the arts, we're not just investing in the arts because we think it's lovely. It is lovely, but it's also because that's what brings people together. That's what brings people. I come from a social work background, so you're always going to kind of hear me thinking about things through how humans interact and brains. But right now, we are under such incredible stress moving through this pandemic. And some, no doubt, have it worse than others, but we are all impacted. And when that happens, we see people really working out of the trauma response in the back of their brain. And that's when you see this edginess and this sort of lack of regard for others. And it's not as simple as they've just forgotten how to treat each other. But that level of chronic stress really does something to people. So we need to get back into community in an intentional way. We need to get back into our downtown shared spaces. We need to enjoy music again. We need to enjoy the arts again, whether it's film or whatever version of that fits you, or sporting events, so that again we can connect with each other, we can settle ourselves down, and we can begin to get just in that kind of gentle ease with each other that we used to enjoy. I think that's really important. It's one of the roles that we have as leaders to ensure that that structure is set up. That's why I'm invested in supporting our small businesses. Not just in our downtowns, and don't forget, it's not just Bellingham. Our downtowns are Linden and Ferndale and Sumas and all of the spaces. Blaine, I'm invested in each of those downtowns and the surrounding areas because those are our community core. That's where we connect. That's where so many of our friends and our neighbors have really businesses that have struggled, but also that are starting new businesses. And I'm just really excited about the fact that we have a lot of new entrepreneurs. I think we have a role as a state to support those entrepreneurs so that they can live the kind of life that allows them to chase after their dreams and also be able to stay in community, you know, right at home with their families, to be able to participate in their children's activities and all the things that we love about Whatcom County, where our values shine. So we're looking at investments, and I've requested investments in small business technical assistance and access to capital. You know, plenty of people have really great ideas that are solid on paper, but if they don't have a family of money or a wealth pot, they might not be able to access just that initial capital get started. That's where we do have a role to be able to set up structures to support our small businesses. Those things are important to me for both reasons, because we do need economic prosperity in our community, and we also need to be able to connect again with each other and settle our brains and bodies down and remember what it feels like to be good, you know, calm in community together.
All right, let's take a live question. Michael is watching on Facebook. And he asks, how can we, oh, it just disappeared. There it is. How can we adequately fund community land trusts so they can compete with the private market and produce permanently affordable homes?
I think there's something in the community land trust in the budget. I think Rep Rammel was instrumental in getting it there.
Thank you for asking this question. I'm just kind of catching up a little bit. You know, one of the things, I don't know if this, hold on, I'm sorry, I just missed it a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you about home ownership, and I think this is part of it. Home ownership is not equitable, accessible to everyone. And it's one of the key ways that regular people in America can build wealth, also familial wealth, and it's getting harder and harder to buy a home. So I think there's plenty of work that still needs to be done. And there is some work that we've done this session in this area to fund some programs that will help that be a little bit easier for folks that haven't had traditional money handed to them from maybe family members or generations before, but can certainly pay the bill. We know that homeownership is often less expensive month to month than renters. So it's really important that we protect that. It's important to me that we have a lot of options for people when it comes to housing. And I know you didn't exactly ask about housing. I'm going to talk about it anyway. Home ownership is a critical piece to that. There are some programs out there like Habitat for Humanity or others like it that we really can use as a way to get people in the housing market that are just raising a family and wanting to live here and live that middle class dream that seems so inaccessible at this point. We've got to get them through community land trusts and other places kind of lined up and ready to go so that they can then have that same opportunity that really we all want. So there's quite a bit going on in housing. The other thing that I would say that I was really excited to support is there are two huge buckets of money that we've invested in housing, and it's necessary to do this. But one of the things is the Housing Trust Fund. And in the Housing Trust Fund, there's an allocation that's separated out so that it does not all go to really the cities, and that it's also equitably distributed to places that are more rural, like Whatcom County. That wasn't the case in this other bucket, which was this capital acquisition fund. But I did request that, and this year it is. So that means 30% of that money has to be spent outside of King County and Pierce County. And I'm really proud of that because we have housing crisis here, and we're not we're not tackling it well yet. So we have some pieces that we're putting together here that moving forward are going to be relief for us in Whatcom County. It will not fix this. We have a shortage of housing that is very significant and was here a long time ago and has only gotten worse. Now we have folks that have lost their housing because of the flood. We need all hands on deck when it comes to fixing this, and we need to build a whole lot more housing. With that, I will pass it on to the next question.
All right, Lucy is watching on YouTube, excuse me, and she says, speaking of community development, please address the budget requests for the Ferndale Community Resource Center and the Ferndale Civic and Community Center.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm so excited about this project. It worked out well, and I'm just really proud that we were able to get that all included in the capital budget for Ferndale. It works together. The projects are hand in hand, and usually what happens is we get piece by piece funding. So I was especially excited to see that this is going to work together. The Ferndale Resource Center has been an incredible resource right now through all of these crises that I talked about early on. All of the extreme weather, all of the flooding, they have just been kind of leading the way to make sure that our most vulnerable have what they need. But they're running out of space, and they've been working out of really strange conditions in a space that really wasn't meant for a Ferndale Resource Center. But as Ferndale continues to grow and just really get larger, it's outgrowing this kind of hodgepodge way of meeting a lot of these needs of our most vulnerable. So having a separate program and then being able to invest significantly, fully funding the Ferndale Civic Center request is really exciting to me. It's going to be a huge investment in Ferndale. And frankly, Ferndale needs it. Ferndale is growing really rapidly, and the community needs that community center. You didn't ask me this either, but I'm jumping in to tell you, I'm excited about what Ferndale's doing in their Main Street program as well. When we see those things working together and we see the economic development along with the civic engagement, along with the investments, the community investments in things like the resource center and the city hall building, we see a kind of center core of community that really allows this community to thrive. So good things are coming for Ferndale, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this comes together.
All right, another question on the capital budget that we got came from Joseph, and he asks, how can we get funding for the Northwest Indian College Health and Wellness Center?
Joseph, we've been talking about this. It's nice to see you. I think that's a great project. We should work on that during the interim and make sure that we have a capital budget request that's ready for next session. It's too late this session, and it was too late when we talked about this earlier, but thank you for bringing it up again, and I'm excited to work with you on it.
Okay, Julie wants to talk about taxes. She reached out to us via the survey and says that her property tax concerns her because taxes to fund schools make up a large portion of her tax bills, larger than she thought was the law. What is the legislature doing on property and sales taxes?
Well, I'll just jump in to say that I have not voted for any sales increases. I voted against many of them. One of the things I am excited about, though, that I did co-sponsor and worked with another representative is a sales tax holiday. I recognize that people are feeling very burdened. It is really tough right now to make ends meet. And we have some work to do in this area. So one of the things that I was excited about is this sales tax holiday, and I hope you all take advantage of it. It's right at the back to school time, the time where kids are needing a lot of their back to school supplies. I know as a mom of 3, that's something that it hits hard because everybody needs shoes and everybody needs backpacks and all the things that come along with that. So at this time, it goes back to let's get shopping local again, make sure that we're supporting our friends and neighbors locally, that we're in community and that we don't pay taxes on that weekend. But it's also sure that, if you've got a big appliance that needs to be replaced, like your refrigerator is about to go out, this is a good time to be able to take advantage of a little break from that. So I agree with you. We need to really be looking out for the middle class and also for those who are struggling. And we all, thinking about our seniors as well. It's really important that we're ensuring that we have a break for folks. And we do have continued work that I think we need to do here.
Yeah, and I would also add that there's a larger workforce with the tax structure work group. One of the problems with our tax system is that it falls disproportionately on low and middle income folks. The way that you make a ton of money in America is often you go into tech, and tech is largely supported by a lot of the infrastructure that we all built together, right? The internet. We talk about expanding broadband, pieces like that. And so I think it makes sense to tax the people who are extraordinarily wealthy a little bit more, have them pay their fair share, at least the same percentage as someone who is low income. And so we've been thinking very carefully about how can we do that in a way that we can still fund schools, we can still fund teachers and all these are the roads that are really important for a functioning modern economy without falling necessarily on things like they're pretty regressive, like sales tax and property taxes.
All right, we got a few more housing questions in the survey, and I see that Shenandoah is watching on YouTube and wants us to go back to that topic too. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on with the Housing Trust Fund, farm worker housing, and House Bill 1782, the middle housing bill?
So the farm worker housing that was being discussed earlier that Shenandoah was asking questions about, that's the Ejido Community Farm, and it was a $1.2 million request, and we just weren't able to fully fund it. We funded some of it, I want to say last year. Alicia got some money into it this year, and it's one of those projects that just there's more need than there is money to necessarily put in those pieces. So there is, so that's the Ejido project. There's also money in the Housing Trust Fund for farm worker housing, and that's a statewide program where you can get into it that communities can apply for. The missing middle is another piece of the housing. The missing middle bill, what it's trying to do is it's trying to re-legalize traditional forms of housing, things like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. I always tell people I live in the lettered streets. My house is zoned single family. I live in a single family house, but I'm right across the street from an apartment, a duplex, another apartment building. And it's one of the things that I love about my neighborhood is that because we have this kind of hidden density and these lovely little garden cottages, I can walk to 12 breweries from my house. No joke. There might be 13. I haven't counted lately. I have 2 grocery stores that are both within walking distance, a fruit stand, the farmer's market. It's lovely. And one of the reasons why is it supports more families, right? So I'd like to see an expansion of that. And so one of the bills that I do have, the missing middle didn't pass. It didn't make it through the House process, but we did pass substantial ADU reform. And so this ADU reform would be a statewide solution that would allow people to build ADUs on their property without having to face things like owner occupancy. And there's a few other ways that we want to make sure that every city is creating space for these garden cottages, accessory dwelling units, whatever you want to call them. And one of the pieces of the pushback is that every city wants to decide it for themselves. But what we see is that when one city has restrictive zoning laws that limit the number and the quantity and the types of housing, then people, even if there's lots of jobs in that city, they can't afford to live there. And so they move to the next city. And so the cities can export their housing affordability crisis to the next city and the next city down the line. And Bellingham is the middle between Vancouver, BC and Seattle, 2 enormous job generators without enough housing. And so we face some of that. But then also when Bellingham doesn't build enough, we see that unaffordable housing exported to Ferndale and Everson and other parts of the county. And so that's why we need that coordinated response there. And I'm really excited about this ADU bill passing. It's going to be tricky, but it's going to be a big win when we get it through. I know you were talking about Rep Bateman's bill, but it did die, and I just think that it was there was opposition from all sorts of places. Some people didn't feel like it went far enough. Some people felt like it went too far, and I think it's just going to be something that we have to keep talking about in the legislature, and I'm committed to continuing to talk about it.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to Kai, who sent us a question on the survey. And he asked this: what will you do to ensure that House Bill 1868 regarding safe staffing for nurses and certified nursing assistants passes?
I'm excited about that bill. I was really excited to vote for it. I know Alicia was too. It's in the Senate now, and so we'll be continuing to watch it and monitor it and letting our senator know that we support it.
All right, thanks everyone. Well, we are rapidly approaching the end of our time here tonight. So I think that is gonna have to be our last question. So let's turn it back to our lawmakers for some closing remarks. Representative Shewmake, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and asking us questions. It's this is how democracy works, is we hear from you and we go back and we fight for your values in Olympia. This is a critical component of it. Someone the other day, I was talking to her about how the flooding had impacted her business and how she needed help. And I talked to Alicia about ways that we could deliver that help. And she's like, I'm sorry for sharing my sob story with you. And I was like, don't be sorry for sharing your sob story with a politician. It is literally our jobs to hear them, but also hearing these stories about where places aren't working actually does a pretty good job in helping us figure out solutions to go forward. And so please keep those lines of communication open. I may not have an answer to everything that comes up. Sometimes I do have access to staff that can help you get those answers. And I'm always happy to explain how I'm thinking about an issue, how maybe there's a piece that, you had more questions about, and I'm happy to answer that. This is part of that important piece of democracy that people mixing around and kind of makes that community. And so I'm so excited to hear from you, and please keep the emails coming. Keep letting me know what you think.
Thank you, Representative Shewmake, and thank you all for being here with us tonight. There are a million things you could be doing, and taking your time with us to express what your needs are is the most important thing to me. I'm so happy to be able to hear from you so that we can help. That's what we're here to do. We are working tirelessly to ensure that we can do the very best we can to deliver for you, Whatcom County. That is what we're here to do. We're here to serve. And I'm just really excited about a lot of the things that are coming next. It's, not finished yet. We're getting close to the end. We are not going to slow down. We have a lot of important things ahead of us. We've got a whole lot of work for kids that's happening. I am excited that we still have, I've got 5 bills alive, and I am not going to stop until we get those things through. So we're looking out for our children. We're looking out for our most vulnerable. I am aware that our children have been through a mental health situation that is just not easy for anybody, as well as a physical health situation. So we're just going to invest in nurses in schools and mental health professionals in schools, because when those kiddos come through the front doors of those schools, they are carrying a load of stress with them that I can't even imagine in my own childhood. So we want to make sure that they are getting the support and the professional warm, open arms and skilled professionals that belong there to greet them when they arrive. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about outdoor education. Our kids need to be able to go outside and not only learn about science by measuring the angles of the sun and checking out the tides, but also because they need to be able to learn how to get those wonderful soft skills that we're all excited about in the business world by learning how to problem solve together and learning how to get along again. So we're going to keep fighting for our kids, but we're also going to keep fighting for you as the adults. We're going to make sure that we're looking out for the most vulnerable, creating opportunity, and keeping our communities safe. So I look forward to hearing from you. I read my emails every day. I don't personally respond to every single one of them, but I read every single email. So just know that you're being heard. You are in my back pocket in every decision I make, because I am here to serve you, Whatcom County. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.